Welcome back to The Infinite Jungle, the podcast about the evolution of Ethereum. On today's show, I am joined by my usual panel of Ethereum staking experts, Nixo, Executive Director of EthStaker, and Yorick, Founder and CEO of Cryptomanufaktur. Nixo and Yorick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm very excited to get started to talk with you guys about hieroglyphs, about MaxEB, EPVS. We'll see if we actually progress to any of the latter topics on this show. But before we begin, here is a quick show disclaimer for our listeners. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. All right, so first topic of discussion today, which I know very little about, but one of the things that you were mentioning, Yorick, when we were preparing for the call is something around hieroglyphs and how they are targeting solo stakers in particular for participation into their protocol, and they're doing so through points programs. I have a lot to say about points programs, but can you first explain what hieroglyphs are, like what the heck the protocol even does, and how they're kind of using points to try and incentivize solo stakers to participate?
So those are actually excellent questions. So I'm going to be bad cop here, and I think Nixo will play good cop. I don't know what Heroglyphs does. They've said they want to launch tokens through using the graffiti information of the validators, right? Which the like the little string that they write into the beacon block. So
that validators control. So when validators produce a block, they can write something in the block saying, I produced it.
Right, and they control it, right? So this is 100% controlled by the validator, and stuff like, I don't know, Yorick was here, that kind of stuff, right? It's just a string. Now, when they were asked about this, how does this work? They gave us a white paper. The white paper opens more questions than it has answers. And it seems like they're not really sure how validating works. Because on multiple levels, they've said, you can't do this through relays and builders. Well, why? Relays and builders don't impact the graffiti. They don't touch that. They touch the extra data in the block, but that's a whole different thing, right? They've said you can't use a relay like MEV blocker, but that's not a relay. That's an RPC, right? So it just seems like from a technical perspective, it doesn't really scan. And then the other part that I'm worried about is they opened up registrations today, and they said, give us 0.1 ETH to register for this thing where we're not quite clear yet as to how it works, or what your rewards might be. And by the way, you can register for the 0.1 ETH even if you don't have a validator. So that then begs the question of, so what is that for, right? Nix, you want to say something nice while I'm tearing them down?
Yeah, just to sort of segue into it, I will say I don't understand. One of the things that they said when they said the registrations are open, they said we recommend one per validator, which is confusing to me because I think that they're trying to reward node operators, so it should be one per node realistically. Otherwise, the professional operators are going to be just as allowed to game this as solo stakers. But if you go through the EthStaker Discord, there's been a lot of skepticism, a lot of questioning about their lack of technical familiarity with solo staking, because one of the things they did say is like you need to remove MEV boost so that it's not taking up any of the graffiti, which showed a misunderstanding of extra data versus graffiti. But we have seen an influx of people who are interested in, like a small influx of people who are interested in validating, not necessarily yet an influx of people setting up validators. But if this does result in more validators, I am all for it. And new node operators specifically, because it would be great to have some sort of, we have seen a lot of energy poured in from degen projects, and we have seen that there is this possibility of rerouting the energy that comes from degen projects into beneficial things. And so if there is a possibility that we can take this energy and have people set up things like nodes, I hope that that's the case. I haven't seen a lot of overlap between people who participate in the degen activity and people who are interested in setting up a validator. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Well, on the topic of degen activity and on the topic of protocols rewarding solo stakers and home stakers through things like airdrops, like giving a designated amount or trying to particularly want solo stakers and home stakers and incentivize their participation in a protocol, it seems like they're a really hot group lately to try and target and to try and get their approval or at least like their support for. And I'm wondering if the main reason that Hieroglyphs is doing this, or maybe other projects that are also targeting solo stakers and their support, is mainly for optic reasons, like altruistic, like, oh, look, we're really helping the Ethereum community out and its decentralization. Or is there like a quality about solo stakers that is particularly very important for this protocol to have? I can understand if, you're really trying to maximize, say, like the decentralization or censorship resistance of your protocol. Maybe you really like try and support solo stakers or something about their distribution. But
Yeah.
then part of me is also like, maybe it's just altruism, like trying to get the good into the good graces of the Ethereum community. What do you think?
So their white paper is really short, and if you read it, like the first half of the white paper says a lot of very good values-based like things that I definitely agree with. That is stuff that I want to support. And the way that it works is like people will be putting tiny little strings into their graffiti, and it'll mine, like being having that string in the graffiti will mine some sort of token. It is not clear to me what the incentive for a project to launch their token in this way is, unless the incentive is we only want solo stakers to be like token holders here, which there is. The reason that would be the case is there is a quality about solo stakers that is good. They participate, they're long-term holders. They've generally been interested in Ethereum for a long time, and they're like the group that you can assume will stay interested, rather than a lot of projects where people just ape in, and then as soon as liquidity incentives are gone, they take off. And so I think there are qualities about this, and I do like seeing that, like when you bring something over to the solo staking community, the first thing that solo stakers do is absolutely tear it apart. I think these are the most scam resistant people on the planet.
No, no. Well, I mean, I was just gonna say about solo stakers being scam resistant. I think also being a solo staker requires a very like high level of technical expertise. I feel like, in my view, being able to run your own consensus layer client, execution layer client, and your MEV boost software, and then upgrade it every like half a year. I feel like that's does require you to be more technically like adept at what you do rather than just like depositing a some amount of ETH that you own into a smart contract.
I
It
will.
does.
I before Yorick agrees with that, I want to disagree real quick. I am not that technically like I don't
Right.
have a computer science degree. I don't know anything about networking or anything like that. I set a validator up the hard way, and there are much easier ways. Like Yorick has actually developed EthDocker, which is like the easy way to set something up in a way that you don't have to like deal with a lot of the harder parts of setting up a validator. And I don't know.
Right.
I feel like if I can do it, a lot of people could do it.
They can, but I don't know that translates to I'm scam resistant. If I take 1,000-foot view, this is not the only project that goes, here's a bunch of hype and we're short on technicals, and you may have a bunch of questions, but just ape in now. There was a framework that helped me understand a little bit what is happening there. Why are people going for it, right? Here, I'm having a hard time with a 0.1 ETH registration fee. Like that doesn't seem like, that's a hurdle. But for other projects, the framework I've been given is it's financial nihilism, or are we saying nihilism? So what it means basically is the people who ape in say, none of this stuff does anything, and or will do anything ever. And the word used wasn't stuff. But we don't care because there might be an airdrop at the end. So we're not interested in the technicals. We're not here for the tech. We don't care about, whether it makes any sense. And if it's a scam, it's fine. We just need to get ours before they rug us. Basically, that's behind a lot of like the meme coin stuff, right? Like, why ape into a meme coin? What's the point? I'll find another idiot to buy it off me, right? So
There's some culture in it. I gotta say, there's some culture in meme coins.
right. So this view of nothing I do in life will get me out of the rat race, so I might as well gamble. Financial nihilism helped me understand what is really happening with some of these projects that get crazy large TVL without actually having said, what their reward program looks like and what their risks look like.
I do agree to some extent. I think that as an industry, there is so much speculation around what we're building because so much of what we're building is not really ready yet. And there's a lot of potential and a lot of interesting tech, but at the same time, there's a token for everything. And that's really how people can speculate. Yeah, gamble, like you said, with their
Right.
money. I think the more that I look into protocols that even do have some amount of roadmap and some amount of technicals there, it's so much of it is still like TBD. Like let's take for example Lido and the recent Symbol DVT that they just launched. That
Right.
is a very, very small step for the protocol, but in a very long journey for their decentralization. Take L2s and the kind of security they really do bring to user transactions via kind of like the technology of fault proofs and
Right.
fraud proofs and ZK and whatnot. I think like Ethereum itself, like there's so much that we're unsure about. We've talked about Nixo issuance a lot too. That it kind of can be taken to the extreme with smaller projects and like newer tech, and you always have to have a lot of like try and do a lot of due diligence. But I can't say there's a lot of due diligence and fundamentals to really look into for a lot of this space. And at that time, like if you're in it to try and make money, you kind of do have to make it a narrative decision, or like a decision based on hype. And yeah, it's hard though. It's hard to figure out really where the line is and where to,
Right.
I don't know, say that things have gone too far.
Specific to Heroglyphs, 0.1 ETH is not nothing. So think hard before you ape into that. If you're like, I don't care, that I like the white paper, something will come of it. That's all you. But, understand that right now the tech is murky and rewards are murky, and 0.1 is a bunch.
And on the flip side of that, I will say that this is very low vulnerability. Like setting your graffiti to something else and sending in 0.1 ETH, you stand to lose that 0.1 ETH, but you're not actually putting your validator capital at risk.
This is true.
And so I do think that people should be wary, but I also think that there is like a good, healthy ratio of skepticism versus being open to new things. As long as you're not putting all your capital at risk, as long as you're not like being open at the cost of possibly losing all of your money. And I do think that there is a healthy version of that.
I feel like this industry is seeking it, has failed trying to find it many a times, as have I personally. However, yes, I do think it's really important.
Well,
and
if you think about it, like the whole point of blockchain is to try to codify responses to behavior. So basically saying like, we know people will act like this. We know people act primarily on self-interest. And so how can we build systems that are these non-upgradable contracts that could take these these qualities of greed into account and turn them from being primarily negative things into things that we could use to build a better world. And so, like, I do think it's important to take real human behavior into account, and degen behavior seems to be a lot of human behavior.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good way that Yorick, you had kind of wrapped up the discussion too, of like, make sure that in this process that people are staying safe out there, and you're not putting money that you're not willing to lose into protocols that clearly do not have a lot of the fundamentals and the questions around like how it actually works, and the technical kind of like foundation for it clear, and to always like be sure to do due diligence as much as you can, and then assess kind of appropriately how much you're willing to put into and support a particular protocol. um, on a new topic for us to discuss, outside of hieroglyphs, one of the things that I think is also about solo staking, and kind of interesting to see the dynamics of how people respond and think about. We've talked on the show a lot, Nixo, about issuance, and that's a change that may or may not be going into Pectra. One of the code changes that will be going into Pectra is MaxEB, changes to the effective balance of validators, and there's quite a few, at least, open questions of how it should be implemented to benefit staking pools, benefit smart contract based staking operations like Lido and Rocket Pool, to ensure that consolidations of stake can happen through trustlessly and permissionlessly through operations by the smart contract. Curious to know if you guys have been hearing anything on what solo stakers are really looking for and excited about with MaxEB, any design decisions or like implementation questions that they've been asking. I think I've heard on the calls definitely voices of opinion from kind of major staking operations, but curious to know if the solo staking community has been talking and discussing the future of MaxEB.
So one of the things that is, I think, sort of a misunderstanding about MaxEB is that it's not meant to benefit either party, like professional operators or solo validators. This is simply to shrink the validator set for the sake of the network, for the sake of everyone, pretty much equally. And so one of the things that I've seen is, in order for this to be effective, there has to be reasons for people to adopt this. There has to be reasons for people to switch over to from 0x01 credentials to 0x02 credentials, which will be the way right now it's looking like to adopt this. And so in order to make that viable, especially for like a professional operator, you have to have a benefit to doing so. You can't just expect everybody to take on this extra step for the sake of the network, because it has to benefit them. And it especially can't negatively affect them in any way. And so one of the concerns that I've seen larger operators talking about is, does this increase the slashing risk? Because if a professional operator is running 10,000 keys, and Yorick can chime in better about this, maybe they have a setup where within minutes they can react and they can shut down the operation so that they don't get more slashed. But if you consolidate this all into one validator, does that raise your risk of getting your entire stack slashed, or your entire delegated stack slashed? And so one of the things that I'm actually excited about, I don't think a lot of people are aware of, is that they have reduced the initial slashing penalty from is it 1 ETH? It's 1 ETH.
1 ETH.
Yeah, one.
They've reduced it from 1 ETH to 0.0078 ETH per validator, and that scales up to, so for a full 2048 ETH validator, it would be only 0.5 ETH for the initial slashing penalty. And so I think that's really great news for solo stakers, because there's so much fear around slashing and there's so much misunderstanding around slashing that like if the initial slashing penalty now is 0.0078 ETH, you're basically not losing much. Like getting slashed is an oopsie. I'm gonna exit, redeposit, and try again.
Absolutely true. And I'll say not really related to MaxEB though. If I can come back to solo stakers for a second, I do see a benefit for solo stakers here. And it's less the consolidation. Say you're a solo staker and you have, one validator. Right now, you can't really compound this in any way, shape, or form. With MaxEB, if you take this validator and you say, I'm going to change the credentials to version 2, which then opts you into MaxEB, right? Now it keeps accumulating, so it automatically compounds as it grows. One thing that's currently not in the spec that's still being discussed that I think would be really beneficial to have, both for solo stakers and for the institutional guys, is some form of automatic sweep still. Right now they're saying, say your validator has grown to, 40 ETH as a solo staker, and you want to skim everything above that right now, or you need a little bit right now, right? Right now, what you need to do is you need to go and send an execution layer message to say, I'd like this much back, which costs gas. There is currently no automated method below 2048, that is, to keep distributing the rewards the way that a version 1 validator does, which distributes everything above 32 ETH automatically every, 10 days or whatever. It sweeps through the validator set, right? However long that takes. There are good ideas on how to do that in a minimally invasive way. Jim McDonald, for example, has been talking about this. He writes ethdo, he's with Attestant. He also writes Vouch and Dirk. So I would encourage core devs to noodle on this a little bit more as to, can we make it possible to still have an automatic sweep of some sort where everything above N, and that would be a value that would have to be set by validator, unfortunately, gets swept, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be a really important feature to include in MaxEB, and one that I actually thought was definitely going in. I didn't know that because of the complexity of how it because of how more complex the code change could become, developers were considering to not keep it in or not have it included.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I think the original implementation was going to be like a custom ceiling. So instead of just opting into a 2048 ETH validator, it could be like a 36 ETH or 37 ETH validator. But I like Jim McDonald proposed something else that involves like sweeping a percentage of your rewards, and instead of setting a maximum custom ceiling, setting like a percentage, which I really like that idea. I don't know how the implementation, how complex it is for core devs though. So
now you can say, I'm still compounding, but I need this much to pay my rent, right? Or just to have an extra take each month, or whatever you do with it as a solo staker, right? I think that's a really good idea. I'd love to see it. It also makes it a lot easier for those institutional guys to do this. So, inside Lido, we've literally had discussions around, okay, how many version 132 ETH do we need to still keep around so that we can easily exit one if somebody wants their money back, right? And we don't have this issue of needing to send execution layer messages, which cost gas, right? It's a big deal. It really is a big deal, right? For the big guys, basically, if they had to take their rewards with a gas cost that ends them, they can't do that, right? So they either have to have validators at the full 2048 that then get swept. But then the question is, okay, if Nix, say, comes along and says, I want my 10 ETH back, right, that I put into whatever, let's say it's Rocket Pool. Rocket Pool says, here's your R ETH, and Nix wants her 10 RETH back into ETH, they need to exit a validator now potentially to do that. And what do you do when they're all 2048 big? Or in Rocket Pool's case, they would be a little smaller, 128, whatever, but same difference. This is hard. And doing a partial withdrawal is possible, but costs gas, right? Which nobody's going to want to pay.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal when we're in whatever market we're in. I have no idea anymore. But gas right now is 10 Gwei.
Right.
And we could potentially enter a bull market where gas is never lower than 100 Gwei. And all of a sudden people who want to...
We've seen it before.
Yeah. And then people who want to exit like 0.5 ETH just to take care of some stuff are going to be like, well, this isn't worth it.
Right, exactly. So some form of automatic sweep, please, right? Noodle on Jim's idea. I get that variable ceilings maybe aren't a good idea, but noodle on Jim's idea to see where that goes. The other part that I think might need a little bit more thought, particularly for the institutional guys, is the slashing penalty. Right now, if I look at it and I say, okay, let's say I take, I take 2048 ETH and I consolidate those into one validator, right? I've done a good thing for the protocol. This is a good thing all over, and we can, if we have the time, we can talk about why this is a good thing. But from my perspective, I just increased my risk when I'm getting slashed. Now my 2040 ETH gets slashed. Sure, the slashing penalty itself has been reduced, but it's reduced also if I have a bunch of 32 ETH validators sitting there, right? So I could go and say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm going to take the lower slashing penalty, and I have stuff that watches my infrastructure, and when we see a slashing, we shut it down immediately, and then my penalty is less.
But question about that, because I thought correlated slashing penalties are a lot higher than the initial slashing penalty. So the initial slashing penalty for a 2048 ETH versus a 32 ETH, clearly they've adjusted things to make sure that it's fine. But like, wouldn't your slashing penalty be a lot higher if you are slashed like 100 validators versus just one large one? Like, wouldn't you? Isn't it more secure?
The correlation, as far as I know, is on the total amount slashed, not the number of validators.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. So in this case, if I say, okay, we've seen this with operators who make a mistake and then something gets slashed, right? And we've seen this. I think there was one recently. 12 validators of theirs got before they shut it down. Right, 12 times 32 is a whole lot less than 12 times 2048. So, somewhat dealing with the fact that it's hard. We need the correlated slashing penalty to protect Ethereum. On the one hand, we need that, right? On the other hand, we need to, or it would be good to not give operators an active disincentive to consolidate these.
If professional operators don't use MaxEB, the whole EIP was useless.
Exactly.
But I also think, to what extent are professional operators using that to try and get versions of this that make their staking operations a lot more a lot less susceptible to slashing at the expense of the protocol security? Because I wonder if how many operators actually do distribute their 32 ETH validators across different machines. Like, aren't they all effectively still on one node? To what extent are these validators like actually benefiting from the flexibility of being able to shut off one validator versus keep like the rest up? Like, I think a 2048 ETH validator on one node versus like several of them on the same node, like that's got to be the same risk.
Yeah, it really depends on who you're talking to. I know that there are people who run 4,000 and 6,000 validators on a cluster, not like a single machine, but if we call the node the cluster, right? Yes, they're doing that. In our case, for example, we're running 1,000 validators per cluster, and this has worked well for us. So we've had situations where something went down and then 1,000 were down instead of the whole thing, right? And then we can fix that and come back up.
Yeah, but Cryptomanufaktur, just to give some context, is one of the most responsible operators in the ecosystem.
Right. Not everybody does that. Some people are like, nope, I need to reduce my infrastructure cost, and I'm just going to run all of it in one cluster. We've seen node operators who are like, when we have, the need to do maintenance, we'll move the keys, right? Or things like the slashing database takes a lot of resources. We'll turn it off. We have our own backend that makes sure we're not getting slashed. That kind of stuff, right? It's just hugely risky. It wasn't just one node operator that got themselves slashed this way.
Gotcha.
I'm opinionated about this. I'm basically saying don't move keys. Right, build your resilience into your clusters in such a way that you can do maintenance without moving keys. But that's not everybody's cup of tea, and then they get slashed. So long story short, not all validators on a node or a cluster of nodes get slashed when a mistake is made. Some will. Right, and what we've seen was around a dozen or so. I think the last time I looked, this was one of the Lido operators. That's what they got. Another one got 20 slashed, something on that order. And there's a big difference whether that's 12 times 32 or 12 times 2048 in the in the value that gets assessed. So,
all right,
yeah, that was long. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to time box the discussion there for MaxEB, but very cool kind of in the weeds discussion about slashing and how slashing really works on Ethereum. We didn't actually get to ePBS, but maybe we can do that next time. It's definitely a research and a very important kind of research initiative that developers are discussing that will impact validators. So I'm sure we can always come back to it, given that it's not
Absolutely.
it's not like not something that we're probably going to see in Pectra or anything like that. But thank you, Nixo and Yorick, as always,
so
for coming on the Infinite Jungle Show. That's it for today's episode. I hope our listeners enjoyed listening, and more importantly, I hope you guys learned something new about Ethereum, particularly on how validators get slashed on Ethereum. Until next time, stay safe out there, everyone.